Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with,
Tomas Härenstam.
and today we're going to talk about Free League's newest Kickstarter right now, Dragonbane, which uh, I've never knew. This has been around for 40 years. Uh, First, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this very interesting project. So, what for anyone that's just hearing about this for the first time? What is Dragonbane?
Well, Dragonbane is actually the English title, the new English titles that we use for a game that has been around for a very long time in Sweden, where we're from and where I'm at right now. The first edition came out in 1982. It's called Drakar och Demoner in Swedish, so it's kind of it has that same kind of status as in Sweden, I guess, that Dungeons and Dragons does internationally. At least it did. I mean, now Dungeons and Dragons is huge everywhere, also here. But historically, Drakar Demoner was kind of the dominant game here throughout the 80s and 90s. Dungeons and Dragons existed, but was not nearly as dominant here. So we had like our own game that kind of dominated the RPG space, and that is this one.
Oh, okay.
Has a Yeah, so that's where it came from, and it has not really ever been translated. Well, actually, the first very first edition of Drakar Demoner was actually a translation of a game called Magic World, which was made by Chaosium. It was a kind of a spin-off, I believe, from RuneQuest, to make a bit of a lighter, faster game. They made a number of games back then that was, I think, science fiction world, and they had some different sort of settings. And one of those was Magic World. That was a fairly easy, straightforward fantasy RPG, and that a company led by a man called Fredrik Malmberg. He was, I think, an intern at Chaosium or something like that back in the early 80s. And he brought that game with him and started a company and published this game that the very first edition was actually a translation of Magic World. But that really took off. And then the second edition of that game that came out in 84, that's really the edition that everyone here knows about. And that kind of took off, and it became a big thing. And basically you could find a copy of this game in almost every family in Sweden. It was everywhere. And that's really the foundation of the RPG industry here. And it's always been primarily, I mean, a game here, and not and also some of the other Scandinavian countries. There has been translation, but never really into the larger market. So we started doing this, that we published a new edition, basically, I mean, primarily for the Swedish market, since we're a Swedish company. But then we eventually felt that this is going to be a really cool game, and I think it has some unique, fun quirks. And so we said, why not test and try it, and translate it to English, and have an international edition as well, and see if there's an interest out there. And that's really what we did, and that's where we are right now.
Oh, wow. So how does this differ from other fantasy role-playing games? I know with Dungeons and Dragons, they were inspired by Jack Vance novels and a little bit of Tolkien. Uh,
Yeah.
is it the same with Dragonbane?
Yeah, Dragonbane, I think it is also kind of a fairly straightforward, classic fantasy setting, with the kind of creatures that you would expect. You have your elves and dwarves and all that. There are some twists to that. Even from the very beginning, I think Dr. Demoner or Dragonbane has had anthropomorphic animals, has been kind of a thing from the very start. And that in itself created a tone that was quite lighthearted. So it's always been a kind of a fun game. It doesn't get super serious. It's not grimdark. You can play it grimdark, I guess, but most of the material has always had this bit of a fun factor to it, that it's not super serious. And that's what we're trying to latch onto also, because we have a number of other fantasy games, obviously, and RPGs that we publish. I mean, we have the One Ring and Symbaroum, Forbidden Lands, even Morkborg. Even all of those are great games, but they're also quite dark, to be honest. I mean, the dark can be great. I love dark, but this one we think is something a bit different. It's a bit more lighthearted. It's a bit more fun in games. You don't have to. It's easier to pick up and play for an evening. So it's that, I think, sets it apart from our other fantasy RPGs, and also perhaps other fantasy RPGs out there, that it has this lighter tone, I guess, and that also carries through in the artwork that by Johan Egerkrans, who has a specific art style that kind of really brings out that fun factor.
Hmm. So what? How are the combat and skill check rules in this game? How's it different from the, I guess, the typical 5e system?
Yeah, it actually differs from 5e, and it also differs from most of our other games because in Free League we have something called the Year Zero engine that most of our game uses in one version or another, and that's basically a dice pool system. Most of the versions of it use a D6 dice pool. There are some variations to it, but basically that system is used in most games. It's in Alien, it's in Blade Runner, it's in Twilight 2000, Mutant Year Zero, and all of that. So, but this one we actually stayed a bit more true, since this is a game that has been around for a long time, and it has the rule specific mechanics have changed a bit from edition to edition, but there's been a bit of a core there that we wanted to keep because it would no longer really be the same game if we ripped out the game engine completely and did something completely different. So we have kept that core and made some tweaks and twists to it now. But the core is based. It's also a D20 based system, but it's not it's a roll under your skill level system rather than roll high, against an armor class or something. So and it's not a level based system. So it's more incremental advancement where you increase skill level. So it's very much skill based. In that sense, it's since it started out its journey as a translation of Magic World, which is a came from the Chaosium RuneQuest side of things. I think that the kind of the DNA of the game system is still, even though it's no longer, it's no longer that exactly. It's its own thing now. But I think the DNA of it, the core principles, are still kind of similar to what you would find in games like Call of Cthulhu or RuneQuest.
Oh wow. Does this have its own setting?
It does. It has had different settings throughout the years. Throughout the years, they developed a big world, a fantasy world, and that was used for a number of years. And then there was a new edition that had a different world. But we kind of go back to the early editions that did not have a complete continents described. This is more of a so what we do is to zoom in on a more limited area, so we don't have maps of continents or described countries, and it's more of a limited area that we focus on and explore in the introductory adventures that we a bit more in detail. So it's more of a micro setting than explaining the whole world. Of course, there's also a larger mythology at work here. That is, I mean, the game in Swedish is called Drakar och Demoner, which means dragons and demons. So we also built kind of a mythology around that kind of, there is like this eternal struggle between these two mythical creatures that kind of inform the rest of the setting. But that's more of a mythological level, and then you zoom in on the more local actually area where you play, but there is no world map or anything like that.
Hmm. I know you already said before that you could be anthropomorphic creatures in this
Yeah.
game. When it comes to like either classes or occupations, what can you be in this game?
Yeah. In terms of classes or occupations or professions, as they're actually called here, they're fairly straightforward, but what you would pretty much expect with some additions. I mean, you have your fighter and your wizard and the rogue and the hunter, but there's also, you can be a craftsperson, so you can kind of, that is also another thing. There is like a treasure hunter type of profession and a couple of more like that. But yeah, and each, the way it's built, that it's skill based, so you have your skill list, that's like the core, but then each profession and each kin, which is what we call these creatures that you can play, like and they have like a specific ability as well that kind of sets them apart a little bit. So that's also comes into play with the professions.
Hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the magic system. Is it very similar to other Free League books that deal with magic? Is it similar in concept and rules wise?
There are some similarities. I think for perhaps Forbidden Lands is probably the closest one. There is a bit of a different system. This you use basically something called willpower points to power magic, and spells, and there are different schools of magic, and basically each school of magic is its own skills you have to roll under to succeed, and then you learn individual spells on, you know, within that school of magic, so you can actually that you can use. And magic is pretty powerful, but then there's a limit to how many of these willpower points you have and how you can replenish them, so it's kind of a limited resource. So yeah, there are differences and similarities to but I think Forbidden Lands is probably, if anyone's familiar with that one, it's you know, there are some similarities there.
So let's talk about the Kickstarter campaign, and congratulations, you made your goal within 4 minutes. That's amazing. Now Free League, when they do the Kickstarters, they pretty much go all out, like dice, maps, and so forth. Should I assume when it comes to your stretch goals and everything, it's very similar? It's going to be a bunch of stuff that you can receive?
Yeah, I mean, basically what we do when we, you know, put a campaign together is that, you know, we have like a baseline of this is like the minimum thing, and then everything that we actually want to do, we add on top as stretch goals, because that means we can actually be, you know, have some safety there. And if we don't reach those stretch goals, then at least we will still have a game that is perfectly playable. But of course, it's, you know, we can add all this stuff. So it's the same thing here. Like you said, we've added dice and cards of different kinds. Now we're adding virtual tabletop editions, and a specific thing for this one is that we're also adding a bunch of more adventures, because what we want to do, and it seems like now that we will be able to do, is to have not just an introductory adventure, but really an introductory campaign in the core box set. So that's going to be cool. There is a nice map, and so of this area that I mentioned before, this valley, all of these adventures will play out in that area. So you basically get a kind of a mini campaign right out of the box.
Oh, excellent. So one last question. If I was running this game, what character would you make to play?
I think it's a lot of fun to play. I mean, it's like we mentioned the animals, and the one specific one that is fairly popular is basically a duck type character. That can be surprisingly fun to play. So I mean, that's a bit of a favorite for this game and a bit of a classic. So I would probably play a duck, or mallards as they're called in the game, wizard. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Sorry, one last question.
Sure,
the really last question. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that I haven't asked you about this project?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot, but I think you covered most of it. And you know, if you want to know more, you can just check out the Kickstarter page.
Yeah, I will leave a link in the description below. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this amazing project. The art looks fantastic. So to our viewers out there, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos. We'll see you soon.